and welcome to episode 20 of The Smallest Thing. I'm Lisa Manterfield. A couple of weeks ago, I attended the Mendocino Coast Writers' Conference. This year, the whole conference was online, and although I missed the in-person connection with other writers, the clifftop walks, and the chance to meet new friends, I'm also glad I decided to attend. I'll tell you more about the conference, my experience in the historical fiction workshop, and a bit of good news I received later. But first, Em and her neighbours get some good news of their own. In this week's episode of The Smallest Thing. Welcome to the serialised audiobook, The Smallest Thing, written by Lisa Manterfield, read for you by Charlie Sanderson.
Chapter 20. Saturday, August the 13th. There's a buzz in the air today. Something big is happening, and those of us still able or willing to venture out gather around Bubble City. Word goes around, hopping the gaps we leave between one another. Almost a month after the start of the quarantine, the first survivor is being released. It's not long before a bustle of activity flares up around the exit to the care ward, and an orderly wheels someone out to a waiting ambulance. I barely recognise him at first. He's dressed in pale blue scrubs that look as if they're hung on one of those hangers designed for baby clothes. They fall around his meagre frame, catching on the bumps of pointed shoulders and sticking out knees. His face looks as if it has been sucked in from behind and, even though the waxy yellow pallor has gone, I'd be hard-pressed to say he looks better. But he must be, because Dad's friend Andy is leaving. A pair of medics helps him to a decontamination shower, and he emerges several minutes later, looking like a drowned rat. As the waiting ambulance pulls around to the exit, a group of medical personnel comes to the fence to wave him off. I find myself waving too. Andy's departure has burst open a bud of hope I hadn't dared feel before. Are they taking him to Elmington? I ask around, wondering if anyone knows for sure. The response comes from a man a few feet in front of me. Yep, Elmington. Jammy devil. They've opened up another wing for survivors. He'll be free to leave from there, assuming he can find anyone willing to take him in. I'm not sure jammy is how I'd describe Andy's fortunes. If anyone is lucky, it's those of us gathered to watch his departure, those of us jammy enough to have avoided infection. Who would risk taking him in, knowing he'd been here? And what about when the quarantine is lifted? Will he ever want to come back? So much of what made this village home is gone. Andy's shop has been boarded up, and even if it wasn't, he'd have nothing to sell and a rapidly dwindling group of customers to sell it to. Many of our friends and neighbours are sick or dying or dead. Before all this began, I swore that once I left, I'd never come back. But now I wonder, when all this is over, will any of us want to return? I wouldn't come back here, I say, put myself at risk of catching it again. Can't catch it twice, says the man. That's what they're saying. So Aiden was right. This thing is actually going to burn itself out. It's the first bit of good news we've had in ages. As I turn to head home, I notice a group of people gathered inside the compound watching Andy's departure. A hand shoots up and waves in my direction, and Deb steps away from the group. She smiles at me, and even from this distance I can sense a shift in her, in everyone in the group. Andy has given them hope, given us all hope, that maybe we'll make it out of here after all. Back at the house, I find Dad staring out the kitchen window. He barely acknowledges my presence. I tell him about Andy and what I heard about him being immune now. I think this is good news, but Dad only nods. He's gazing out into the village, but it's clear he's far, far from here. Earth to father? I say. It takes him a second to react, then all he does is shake his head. That's good news, he says. Good for Andy. I get the sense there's more to this thought, but before I can pry further and offer an ear if he wants to talk, the doorbell rings. I'll get it. I'm grateful to step out of the circle of melancholy that seems to have descended around Dad. Through the glass in the front door, I spot the edge of a yellow suit. I open the door with my guard up, always on alert that a moment's good news could turn bad in an instant, especially when suits are involved. But I'm relieved to find Aiden on my doorstep, peering at me over the top of a large cardboard box. "Delivery," he says, but he doesn't offer the box to me. I reach to take it from him, but he pulls it back. "Special delivery," he says. "Meet me around the back." My heart flickers. Did he get it? I close the door and hurry into the backyard to meet him, calling to Dad to come with me. "Morning, Mr. Siddle," Aiden says, striding into the garden and setting the box on the patio table. "Brought a few extra supplies in case you need them." "Good of you." Dad's tone is polite but sceptical. Aiden opens the flaps and lifts out packets and boxes, which he then sets on the table. Face masks, gloves, vitamins, unidentifiable government-issued dehydrated slop, Indian takeaway, chicken tikka masala, lamb rogan, Josh biryani, poppadoms and onion bhajis. He turns and grins at me. "Really?" I ask, as he hands me a large lumpy bag. The distant memories of soothing aromatic spices already tantalising my taste buds. "Sadly not," he says, "but it's almost as good, I think." I can barely hide my disappointment as I peer into the bag. It's not Indian food. It's not even edible. It's something even better. I reach in and pull out a pile of yellow fabric. I don't need to unfold it to know what it is. A hazmat suit. "You got one," I say. Mixed with my awe and appreciation that Aiden granted my request, a pang of guilt flares in me that I've once again risked getting him into trouble. But this time it's for a good cause. My dad. "Technically there are 6, Aiden says, setting the bag on the table. "You can't use them more than once, but they should last a few days." "Thank you," I tell him, doing an internal dance that he brought extra suits, perhaps one that I could borrow. "A lot, thank you." Which causes Aiden to smile. It's a smile that goes all the way to his eyes, which is fortunate as that's all I can see of him. "What is all this?" Dad asks, nosing at the suit. "Special dispensation," Aiden says. "You've been officially designated community liaison, which means as long as you follow protocol, you'll have a little bit more freedom around the village." Dad looks from Aiden to me and back again, and I can see he's worked out the approximate sequence of events that led to this. He beams at me, as if he's been given the best gift ever. "Thank you," he says to both of us. I shuttle the supplies into the house, while Dad gets instructions on how to properly put on, seal, and then take off the hazmat suit. I'm pleased to realise that our makeshift protocol isn't too far off from Aiden's training. We've been putting layers on in order and checking one another for leaks and tears, just like they do in Bubble City. Aiden explains the decon procedure they use, with the foot baths and timed shower, and when I show him our setup, he looks impressed. Even so, when he shows Dad how to safely remove and destroy a used suit, I start to worry. There are so many things to remember and so many mistakes that could be made. Finally, he's all suited up and ready to go. As he turns so Aiden can check his hood one last time, he catches my eye. His shoulders slump and I've no doubt he's thinking about all the rules he's breaking, but he's so excited about being able to visit his people in safety that he says nothing. He may be having second thoughts, and he's not the only one. But when I study his face, I can see how much he wants to go, how much he needs to be helpful. I glance at the official Red Cross badge clipped to his chest. J. Siddle, Community Liaison. I give him an encouraging smile and a little nod. It's my way of telling him it's okay for him to go, even if I'm not sure I'm right. "Be careful out there, Mr. Siddle," Aiden says. Dad's eyes crinkle into a smile through the narrow slit left for them. "I will," he says. And then he's gone, leaving Aiden and me alone. I can't help but wonder what I'd have to do to get special dispensation so I could get into Bubble City and spend some time with Deb. But I've already asked enough of Aiden. "Do you want a cup of tea?" I ask instead, before realising how stupid that is. Of course he can't sit here and drink tea with me. But he surprises me. "If you're making one, I will. Cheers." I duck into the kitchen. I don't point out his mistake. It doesn't matter that he can't drink it. It feels so good to be able to do something normal like offer a guest a cup of tea. My grandmother used to say that tea makes everything feel better, and when so much is wrong, I'm glad for this brief moment of normalcy. I like Aiden's company, strange though it is to contemplate drinking tea with a man covered in plastic, but I'd make all the tea in China and India combined if it meant he would stay a little bit longer. "How did you manage to wrangle this?" I ask, returning to the garden to set out the teapot and mugs. "Community liaison? Is that really a thing?" "Believe it or not, it is. It's something we've learnt from other..." He catches himself, and I can see him searching for the right word. "From other situations. It helps bridge the gap between us and them. You know? It makes people feel more comfortable to have someone they know on their side." We sit across the table from one another, me sipping my tea and him watching through his visor as his goes cold. As I suspected, he has no intention of drinking it, but I think he appreciates the normalcy too. "Is he going to be okay out there?" I ask. "As long as he follows protocol," Aiden says. I wish he wouldn't do this. I wish he'd just stay here and worry like a normal dad. I'm not sure he is a normal dad. It's fairly brave what he's doing. A little bubble of pride swells and pops inside me. My dad, the hero. I've never thought about him like that. Perhaps all this village stuff hasn't been meaningless. Perhaps it's only me who's seen it that way. "Thank you for making his day," I say. Aiden shrugs off my thanks. "When I left to come up here, my dad told me that if all I did was make a difference in the life of one person, I'd have done my job." "In that case, you should be getting double pay." Aiden grins and my face flushes. But honestly, he's the only thing making this whole mess bearable, and I don't know how to tell him how grateful I am for all the chances he's taken for me. "There's something I want to show you," he says. "More contraband?" "Sort of." He reaches into his bag of tricks and tells me to put on fresh gloves and make sure my mask is secure. I put down my tea and do as I'm told. Then he takes out a tablet sealed in a double plastic bag. "I think this is going to be good news, but you have to promise me you'll keep it to yourself." I make a small cross sign roughly over the spot where my heart is, and he prods the tablet to life and slides it across the table. The screen fills with a cluster of cells, an image I recognise immediately from biology class. "Each cell tells a story," my old teacher used to say, and my guess is that these cells have something to do with the mess in Eam. "This is our virus," Aiden says. The images are beautiful, I have to admit. Blooms of pinks and yellows and greens, like the most exotic flower I've ever seen. "This is the host cell." Aiden leans across the table and points to the pink area. "The human cell, and this is the virus here." He points to the yellow clusters at the top of the screen. I'm shocked to see that the virus is the most beautiful part of all. There are clusters of yellow petals with delicate fringes, the kind of thing you'd expect to find bees buzzing around. I half expect to see a spotted ladybird crawl across the screen. How can something so beautiful be so deadly? The drop-dead gorgeous assassin. The virus is pretty enough to put on display, like one of my mosaics, and yet it's the last thing you'd want to do. I point towards the chain of green emeralds sprinkled between the virus and host. "What's that?" Aiden smiles at me through his mask, his eyes lighting up with barely contained excitement. With luck, he says. That's our hero. I stare at the row of green blobs. Is this what's going to save my life? It looks so fragile. What is it? It's descended from an ancient plant with a fancy Latin name I can't pronounce. It's found in hostile environments. Like Siberia. You are quick. The nomads make tea from it, a health tea. They think there might be a link between the tea and those who show immunity to the virus. A vaccine? Not yet, he says. It has to be tested, but it's looking hopeful. The thought that the vaccine won't come quickly enough for my neighbours or my best friend flits through my mind. I allow it to run its course, but keep my lips pressed together tight, as if speaking the words might make them real. A group of our doctors is pushing for a trial, but the government won't approve it without data. That's stupid. What harm could it do? Unfortunately, that's the bit they don't know. But if it kills the virus, why not try it? I ask, furious now that they could be so cautious when people are dying. That's the thing. It doesn't kill it, not exactly. If you think about two pieces of Lego and how they fit together, you know, how the nub of one fits perfectly inside the bottom of another, that's how the virus attaches to the host. He presses his gloved thumb and forefinger together to demonstrate. So the vaccine, it acts like a protective barrier to prevent the cells connecting. He glances at me from the corner of his eye, a bit like this suit, between you and me. His directness makes me flinch, and for a second I'm reminded of Ro egging me on and daring me to be his rebel. But when I glance at Aiden, I feel something I never felt from Ro, the thing that was always missing. He has touched me, not with his hands, not with his body, but with something even more powerful, a feeling. It's as if some part of him has reached through the layers of his suit and connected with something deep inside me. It's the most ridiculous notion ever, and yet, instead of being thrilled about the protective vaccine that will keep the virus from my cells, all I can think about are those two bricks of Lego. A smile tugs at the corners of my lips as I wonder if our two matching pieces could ever get together. Aiden leans toward me, and I'm certain he's going to reach his arms out toward me. All I need is a twitch from him, a sign that it's okay, and I would go to him. I wait, but the touch doesn't come. When I dare to look up, his eyes are pools of agony, and I can tell he feels the same way. I slide one foot toward him underneath the table, and he puts up his hands. No, his voice is strained. Don't. It's not fair. I try to keep the tears from coming. I don't want to show him my weakness, but I'm not sure I can contain it anymore. He twitches his arms, and for a moment I think he's going to hold them out to me, but he doesn't. Instead, he clasps his hands behind his head, pressing his elbows together in front as if trying to hide his face. Then he shakes his head and turns away. My body feels like two entities, the real me trapped inside an exterior shell. I want to rip myself open so I can get to Aiden. The sensation is so overwhelming my nails start to ache with the desire to let myself out. I scratch them across my belly, over the spot where the feeling is trying to burst through, but it's no use. The ache won't go away. So I gather up the cups, still filled with cold tea, and hurry inside the house. I dump them in the sink and run the water, covering the sounds of me trying to collect my breath. When I'm sufficiently pulled together, I return to the patio. Aiden has left, and I am more alone than ever.
Welcome back. Last weekend, I attended the Mendocino Coast Writers' Conference. I love this conference. It's a really welcoming community of writers and a place to go and just soak in writerly joy. It also holds a special place in my heart because at last year's conference, I won a scholarship, I met my agent, I found a wonderful writers group, and I discovered the author who inspired me to launch this podcast. Scott Sigler has been narrating and podcasting his books in weekly episodes for 15 years and has amassed more than 40 million downloads. If you like a little sci-fi, thriller, horror, check out Scott Sigler's podcast. This year, I started out the conference with a bit of good news. My current work in progress, set in England during the Second World War, took second place in the historical fiction contest. I was so pleased. I workshopped further chapters at the conference in Susan Stinson's historical fiction workshop. Over 3 days, I had a long list of questions answered about issues specific to writing history. But more than that, I received encouraging feedback and a clear message: keep writing. Diving back into this novel in progress made me think again about life during the Second World War. For that period, the lives of ordinary people were far from ordinary. They found themselves in an uncertain and frightening situation, a big global event with circumstances out of their control. They were forced to make a lot of sacrifices, small ones like making sure no speck of light from inside their houses could be visible to enemy bomber pilots flying overhead. They dealt with loss of freedom, rationing, and a whole list of things they could no longer do or enjoy. And some made the ultimate sacrifice, losing their lives. In many ways, there are a lot of similarities to what we're dealing with during this pandemic. Some of us are inconvenienced by having to wear masks, adjust our social lives, and not being able to do things we once enjoyed. Others are struggling with loss of income, isolation from loved ones, and going through big life events without the support of having someone by their sides. Worldwide, more than 20 million of us have contracted COVID-19. Nearly 750,000 have lost their lives. As Susan Stinson wrote in an interview for the Mendocino conference, people have been through a lot on this earth. Beings of all kinds have adapted and survived under tremendous pressure. Writing is inherently an optimistic act because it presumes a future reader. It is an act of trust in the future. I'll link to her interview in the show notes. Throughout history, people have endured untold tragedies and lived to tell their stories. If we all pull together, we'll get through this, and maybe someday someone will tell our stories of courage, self-sacrifice, and survival. Until next week, stay safe. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Smallest Thing. To make sure you don't miss next week's episode, you can subscribe now on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and more. If you'd like to support the show, please leave a review and share this series with others you think might enjoy it. If you're on Instagram, tag me there at LisaManterfield_, or follow me on Facebook at author Lisa Manterfield and Twitter at Lisa Manterfield. My newsletter subscribers are always the first to know about my news, events, upcoming releases, giveaways, and more. Sign up for monthly delivery at lisamanterfield.com/subscribe and get your complimentary copy of Love, Loss and Letting Go, 3 of my short stories. Thanks to Justin Joseph for producing and editing this show, and to Ketsa.uk for the music. That's all for this episode. Thanks for listening.